Dr. David Mushabe from the Mushabe-Munungu and Company Advocates, Imam Kasozi, lecturer at IUIU, also a Muslim cleric. Imam, the Committee on Rules, Discipline and Privilege is continuing with its study of the parliamentary rules and procedures to establish if Ministers Hilary Onek and Amama Mbabazi are in contempt of Parliament for refusing to adhere to a parliamentary resolution to step down. Today, Mbabazi appeared before the committee and stressed that he is not going to step down on flimsy accusations which have no basis in law. He says there is no offence under the Ugandan law and the rules of procedure of Parliament known as contempt of Parliament. Yet the Constitution says one cannot be prosecuted for an offence that does not exist. Who is fooling who, Imam?
Probably now that we have a doctor of law here, he will help us on this, but I want to state what I think as a human being and using my ordinary intelligence and my education. Number one, Mr. Mbabazi should have a courtesy of reading the minds of the people who are stating this and say, okay, morally, me as a Christian, is it really right for me to still insist? Because in law, they have what they call the letter and the spirit. And you should know that in law, almost 90% of issues that govern human society are not by law. These established laws, the legalities as he's talking about. It is only human understanding and saying, look, let me ask myself, even my heart of heart, if I insisted and did this, what about the minds, the ordinary mind? Okay, if people become too legalistic, I know Mbabazi is a lawyer, and therefore he is using the Constitution, and he has actually deployed some tens of boys and girls on various radio stations, and that's what they are speaking. Exactly what he has. Yes, I have listened to them on various radio stations in the local languages, and they are saying we in analysis. They are using the word analysis, but because me as a student of statistics, who ventured into statistics because I studied the population, I said, what analysis are they talking about? What level of analysis? What variables are they testing? So, what I think, morally, legally, Mbabazi could be right, because this is just an allegation. But moral as a person, because Mbabazi is a grandfather. Mbabazi is not just a boy, he's not just a man, he's a grandfather. And a grandfather, even in the African context, meant a lot.
Yes, he's called judge.
There are certain things you would not do because he is now waiting to be judged by his own grandchildren. Oh, that's where he's going. Because if he's not very careful, he'll find himself in a court where his grandchildren
are the magistrates.
They are the judges, or they are the ones who take a decision. And this one happened to our family. We went for a clan meeting at home, and my uncle had a problem with some children, some of my cousins, and then things became very hot. And I asked him a question that, look, my uncle, you are now being judged by your grandchildren, just because the family, the clan meeting does not discriminate. And therefore, where are you going? Then he
had to think twice.
He stood up and went away. And then when he went away, because I know what I was doing, I passed. I brought a resolution in that meeting that on whose land is he sitting? How did he acquire it? Did he buy it? They said no. Then let us ask him to leave our land because it is a clan land. He came back the next day and I said he must pay a fine because he did respect. So Mr. Mbabazi, if he continues to say because he's a lawyer and because he holds his power and he is being protected by people he recruited in security, by the way, they are the ones spreading so many other things because they know more information than many other ordinary Ugandans. But some of us who we are not in security, we are not ordinary minds to be fooled
Okay.
So all this whole battle, whether
it's a moral issue, not a legal.
Yes, morally, I think he should have said, okay, I have no case. After all, I will be proved innocent, and then he will come as Bainomugisha put it. He will actually come back as a hero. But if he tussles this, and supposing even the smallest 25% of this information, if it's the what is correct,
right,
he will be ditched forever.
Dr. Mushabe, the Catholic Church this week, through its Episcopal Conference, which is the highest decision-making body in the country on that side, issued a statement asking both Mbabazi and Onek to step aside. They say that for meaningful investigation to take place, the two must be out of office. Why are we hearing such strong statements?
Really, lamentably, African politicians don't have a culture of stepping aside or resigning. We read about these things in Europe, America, South America. The African is still, by nature, very rigid. When it comes to power, they think stepping aside, you have relinquished that power, you have now reduced yourself to a commoner, or to a position of a commoner. But I want to concur with the Imam Kasozi that the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. If you go by the letter of the law, you become like a robot. But if you come down and say, wait a minute, what was the legislative intent? What is the spirit of the law? If you go with the spirit of the law appeals to conscience. And once your conscience is appealed to, then you step aside. That's why I think that the three ministers who stepped aside recently, like Honorable Kutesa, Honorable Mwesigarukutan, and Honorable Nasasa, they made a wise decision. Because if this court case goes on and they are exonerated, they are going to emerge as heroes.
They will be heroes.
Now, there will no turpitude, they will be at a higher pedestal. But can you imagine if this distinguished politician of ours later is found to actually be guilty, and him and his colleague, they were rigid, they held on to their position, said, no, we are not guilty. You see, in the other, I think it was the 6th Parliament, they censured the two, yeah, and I think
Jim Mwezi,
yes, they censured them, but that did not meet the legal standard beyond reasonable doubt. The Parliament does not have to prove beyond reasonable doubt. The Parliament only sees that what you did was unbecoming of a legislator or unbecoming of a minister. You don't get sent to jail, but it is sort of a disciplinary remedy.
Right.
So we have a problem. If I can go back, we have a problem of right versus expediency.
Yes.
We need our politicians to do what is right, not what is expedient.
Yes.
And if they start thinking about what is right, then they are thinking about posterity. They should stop thinking about today's food, but think about tomorrow and 100 years from now.
Yeah.
When you hear the governor issuing a statement about the money that bought the jets, and then the permanent secretary of finance contradicts,
and these are
the governor,
high official.
and the permanent secretary says, no, the money is in the Bank of Uganda. You're implying that the governor who has Bank of Uganda doesn't know the money which is there. So who is lying? When you see the right hand fighting the left hand, you know the person is in a crisis. That the person is not not in control of his anatomy.
Right.
So this government of ours, which is contradicting itself at a very high level, I don't know whether these religious leaders should pray for them or something else should be done. So the betrayal is by the elite. I have always emphasized it. Even when we go for elections and they say so and so rigged, they bribed, it is not the peasants who demand for the money. It is the elite who compete with their money. Therefore they tarnish democracy. So it ends up being a pseudo-democracy. We go to elections just as a formality, but we don't achieve the very essence of democracy.
Obama said some people sprinkle in elections here and there. He doesn't think that's democracy. Dr. Bainomugisha, what do you read in this?
Thank you very much, Edmond. Two quick comments in relation to the ministers that have been implicated. I think I concur with my colleagues. I only want actually to continue to appeal to their conscience. that actually it is important. It is in times like this one when statesmen stand out of men and look at the country. And I think it's the country that is important. It's at this time actually when they should provide leadership to the country. And the leadership, of course, is to do the inconvenient thing. Is the, of course, giving way. And as he said, actually, there is a president, Moses Wetangula, the foreign minister of Kenya, stepped aside for a whole year. Right. He's back in his docket and is steering and very stronger. I think that is important. Recently, the Prime Minister of Italy, he also bowed to the pressure to save his country from the storm. So, and of course, in this country also there is some of course precedent, but we have not achieved that precedent. I think this has to do perhaps with the whole question of the nature of the state and how people come into power. I think people here come into power through a struggle, and they think then it becomes an end in itself. Right. But it should be a means. I think leadership or politics should be a struggle to serve others better than even yourself. So if it is service above self, then I think our leaders then they shouldn't even now be obstructing the investigations. And as Dr. Mushabe rightly said it, this is not about prosecution. It's about they are not being sent to the parliament doesn't have to prove right or wrong, but there is a red flag, and so people need to respect that, and they will bounce back. But to now, even now, by the way, what you see as this committee, the Committee on Rules and Discipline, for me is a diversionary thing, because it is now taking away the whole parliamentary investigation from the oral bribes now into where refusing to step aside is contempt of parliament. I think it's diversionary, and by the end of it all, they have lost where they started from. So I think it is important that that committee disposes of its work very quickly, and I think the parliamentarians need to cause it to finish so that they go back to where it all started. Because now what is at crossroad in this country is democracy. Whether we are deepening democracy, whether we are stagnating democracy, or whether we are going to experience a democratic reversal with all its consequences, including, of course, anarchy and the instability where this country has come from. And of course, the preamble of our constitution is very clear. It recognizes where this country has come from, and I think it will be absurd for any one individual to take that country to that mad road that we have actually come from.
Edmond, in the 90s, I was in US. I lived in California. The chief of police of Los Angeles police went to Las Vegas and slept in a casino, one of those luxurious casinos. The owner of the casino somehow had a contract with the police of Los Angeles, but this guy had just gone there on his own, program. Leisure. And when the owner knew, said, "No, tell the police the bill is on the house." Yes. So he slept on the street. When that information leaked in California, they told the chief, this is conflict of interest. You need to step down. The chief stepped down. It is that's what leaders do. But rulers are unable to do that.
Imam in Kasozi, donors cut aid over corruption. This week they announced cuts in aid to Uganda, protesting the lack of a will to fight corruption. That's what they said. And they also said there's a failure to ensure quality in projects that these donors fund. The most affected sector is education, and but other cuts are expected elsewhere. Will the Ugandan government listen this time, Imam?
It may listen, it may not listen. For one reason. Who is affected? You see, if they were affected, the leaders, yes, then they would listen.
Well, how would they be affected?
But meaning that the cut of the cut down of the donor money or donor funds, yes, affects their way of living. But this is going to affect the ordinary Ugandan citizen. The poor mother of Imam Kasozi, who is in the village, okay, is not going to be affected. The children of the poor, because are the ones who are going to be affected by these cuts in donations or in donor money in education.
Yes.
And therefore, what is the consequence? These big men will of course continue sending their children abroad, and they will be enjoying this good education, preparing them to come and take over where they left. Okay, so that's where, if we want to achieve anything out of this, if the donors have done so, then the civil society, the ordinary Ugandan, people who are mindful of this country, those who think they belong to this country, and therefore they want to see a better country, are the ones to come up and say, listen a bit, what are they saying? If they say no donor money, who is going to be affected? Mulago Hospital. Some drugs will be missing whether you want or not.
Yes.
Okay. And then some
HIV
laboratory equipment in some schools will automatically miss out, because the government, for example, is now busy building big structures on schools, in schools. But the money is donor money. So if that money is stopped, and these laboratories and libraries stop where they are, who is the victim? That's why, to me, when people are discussing USE, whatever, may I say, fortunately, I am a beneficiary of what they are talking about. Because when I went to Senior 5, I never paid any coin. The district, my district, used to give bursaries to people who went to say, there all comes almost. Those of us who studied in the 70s and 80s, we got all these bursaries. And even when we came to university, it was not only free education, but accompanied with some donation called the boom,
yes.
and therefore books allowance, station allowance.
When you talk about boom, you talk about pocket money. This
Therefore,
actual pocket
where we are, the donor, I think, needs also to look at it critically, because in Zimbabwe it happened.
Yes.
Mugabe still lived his life. It was the ordinary Zimbabwean.
But there are places he cannot visit. They've cancelled visas.
That is no problem. Visiting is not his problem.
They might need to go shopping.
Does he have something?
Now, Edmond, I think the donors are right. Yes. They are 100% right. You are familiar with the bicycle saga? You are familiar with the corruption associated with NADS, AGOA, National Forest Authority? Here next says, look, the president was lied to. The Jagari cannot generate that kind of power, which they are saying.
So there's some ghost capacity there.
There's some ghost capacity. Then they tell you how money is subsidized by the government of Uganda. And when we talk about the government of Uganda, we are talking about the citizens of Uganda. So the donors are right. If they are going to bring their money here, it better be put to good use. But let me add on to what Imam Kasozi stated about these big men sending their children outside to study, then they come back. I have always told them, I said, ladies and gentlemen, you are making a mistake. You don't mismanage, get billions, send your children to study in Europe and America, bring them back to a hostile environment. Because the whole public knows who these children are. I think they are being even unfair to their own children. Because when I was growing up, there are so many, there are some rich families. Were cattle keepers. They had like hundreds and what. Now those families call them and none of them will answer. The children of former poor people are the ones now leading this country. They are in control. Those are forces of nature. Murphy's law. What goes up must come down.
True.
Now, whether their children will go get PhDs from Europe or America,
cannot help them.
These poor people who have remained here will eventually take over because they are the majority.
Yeah, I think
the school I went to had pupils from the president. When I went to school in the 70s, president and army commanders and so on. I don't see many of them now.
I think rich people must invest in poor people. If they want to enjoy peace and stability, because you cannot survive in a hostile environment. That is one. But the second point, of course, I think government needs to demonstrate its commitment in fighting corruption. You see, when the donors cut donor aid, but also actually withdraw it from basket funding. You see, basket funding was a vote of confidence on government capacity to manage public resources. Remember, this is taxpayers' money from their countries. They also account. So now it means that actually our rating has been reduced from that basket funding because we cannot manage it, now to project funding, now to civil society. And then we are going actually to see another scenario. Now, some government people are going now to hit civil society, that they are the ones now getting money, they are the ones undermining them, failing to address the problem. I think it is imperative that we address corruption head on to restore that donor confidence. Of course, in the long run, the country, it's not good to remain on donor aid. And I was happy that actually we are reducing our donor dependency towards zero, because that's what should happen, because actually it has not proved the development, this donor aid does not develop a country. But I think corruption has gone too much, and I think it is important that we reduce it. And sending our children actually to those countries, most of them come back drugged.
Oh,
the children.
Tell us about that.
I think the experience, because when you send these children abroad and they have no one to look after them, to mentor them, most of them end up with identity crisis.
I saw a post on Mail the other day. A lady was saying she looked at a relative of hers, 29 years old, married, walking into a women's salon to have his hair done, and is married.
Crisis.
Yeah,
that
is a bigger problem.
I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong.
That's what I mean.
Bewilderment.
Yeah. I had an opportunity that I went out of this country to do some studying when I had finished university education, and I found the people who had gone there before finishing secondary education. Their mentality and their thinking and the way they look at is strange to this country, and therefore it does not help them even when they come back. They could have the papers,
but the best way is to invest in the education sector. And let me say something very brief. Uganda has a comparative advantage in the East African countries in the education sector. That's why the Kenyans and Tanzanians are craving for our education. So Uganda should choose its niche in education. It is cheap, and invest in our education so that we also dominate the region with education. So I think if we are to invest in education, then where do we excel?
I have a warning. I have a warning, Edmond, for those big people listening. If you don't empower the poor, they will bring poverty to you eventually.
They come with it in a basket.
They will eventually bring poverty to you.
Imam, let's talk about the power. Very briefly. Yeah, well, maybe some people think their contract should be terminated. Is it fair or is it not?
Power. You see, there is a crisis in almost everything. Something is going wrong, and I had also on a radio station this morning, I think, whereby yesterday somebody was accusing Insereko that it is Insereko who tabled the motion in Parliament not to pay people who some money, that we are in power crisis.
Who generated it?
Yes, something that is not correct. That is reducing yourself to be too low in thinking, to imagine that a motion by an MP is done which, but what should we do? This I think what the traders did was somehow, but the unfortunate part of the traders in this country, they do not have what they call stamina in these days. They cannot stick to their guns for 2 days, for 3 days. They coil very quickly, and because for me, many people have resorted to solar, others to inverters, but they remember what UMM still charges us what they call standing what? That standing alone. Even if I am not charged because I have not used the power, because I'm going to pay you some money for that service which has not come, you must be questioned for it.
Dr. Mushabe, should women's contract be cancelled? It shouldn't generate power.
No, I agree with the General Saleh's report, and I read his comments recently in the papers. This thing should be taken back to government. Now you have four. They split UEB into 4 organizations, and they are all expensive to maintain, and they are all tricky in their operations. So I think the privatization of UEB was premature.
Yes.
Government should retain certain things like health, power, education. Government should remain at the same.
Dr. Bainomugisha.
My quick comment is this: energy is a security matter. It's like actually food security.
Right.
So you cannot risk energy to private people who are driven by profits.
Right.
And that's why I think it is important for government to take back Umeme and invest in it strategically, because now we cannot even attract foreign direct investment because this is a poor environment for investment.
Thank you very much indeed, Adiaga. We can't talk about Somalia because our time is up. Thank you very much, Dr. Arthur Bainomugisha. Very briefly, why is there so much interest right now in Somalia? For a long time, only Uganda and Burundi was there. Very quickly, now we see Kenya. Very briefly, Doctor, but only you.
No, for a long time, Somalia was not a strategic area, but it has become a strategic area because it has become a breeding ground for the terrorism, Al-Qaeda, El-Shabaab, and others. But of course, the piracy, the disruption of trade on the seas, it becomes very, very, very important. But at the same time, I think you see strategic positioning of countries in the region. I think Kenya is trying to reassert its regional hegemony, where Uganda has dominated before. There's a struggle for regional power.
Dr. Arthur Bainomugisha, Director, Research and Manager of the Peace and Democracy Program at ACODE. Dr. David Mushabe from Mushabe-Munungu and Company Advocates. Imam Kasozi, lecturer at IUIU, also a Muslim cleric. Thank you for tuning in. I've been your host, Edmond. The Spectrum will be back on Monday. Up next is the news in English. Do stay tuned.